Good evening, dear friends. We are together in the 16th video of the Divine Order and the Universe Reading and Commentary series.
Good evening. It is so good to be here with our friends. I hope this evening will be beneficial for us and for our friends.
Last week, we read and discussed how the original influence, after filtered through the unitary and entered matter, changed its original state and how this mechanism bring out the nucleus of an atom. We discussed how elements emerge. This evening we will go deeper into these topics. And we had finished with an introduction to the topic of the magnetic fields. Today, when we hear magnetic fields, we have more or less a fair amount of understanding what it means. Yet, considering the fact that these spiritual communiqués were given to mankind between 1958 and 1959, this topic becomes more special. What do you think, Tümerhan?
Yes, I agree. Because, right now, the whole of our daily life has already become an electromagnetic field. Our mobile phones, all of our electrical and electronical vehicles, gadgets and tools continuously emit these fields. And in the medicine, we use these fields. And we began to learn about their advantages and disadvantages. Yet, as you said, in 1958 or 1959 these topics were not that clear and there was not much clear public information about these. In that sense, we are very lucky. Because, now we can easily connect this recent knowledge with the knowledge given in this book.
Yes, magnetic fields are now a necessary part of our life. People make jokes about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs by adding internet to the bottom of the list. And when you visit somewhere else, you first ask for their Wi-Fi info. Actually, the whole human system works with these fields. We say I like or don't like this or that person at first glance. Or we say such things for the settings or environment. We feel good or bad in some places. Such feelings are also related to the interaction of magnetic fields. Or in healing, it is all about the interaction of magnetic fields. And in this book, we read how this magnetic field is initiated, way before the being is brought out, by the influences arriving at the amorphous matter. We say all the time because this book says in many ways that microcosmos or macrocosmos work by the same principles, and the same principle is valid in our hydrogen cosmos, as well. And this evening, we will be reading and commenting on further stages of this hydrogen realm, about animate inanimate things, about perispirit, and we have video clips to share on these topics. Shall we begin reading? So, what mankind calls perispirit is also nothing but these magnetic fields of matter. That is, magnetic fields of human bodies are what people accept as the meaning of perispirit. So, a spirit utilizes matter by influencing its magnetic fields through its being, which is a representative of itself in the universe and is but an energy complex. And out of this matter, it establishes bodies which are appropriate for its application in the worlds that these belong to, and through these bodies, by influencing magnetic fields of other beings and the matter of that world, and by utilizing them, it establishes its evolution. We have said that just as complex magnetic field synthesis exists for a world, complex magnetic field syntheses also exist for solar systems and nebulae, which are much more complex than that. Beings do their duty by influencing these realms through the channels of these fields. For example, there exist very sublime beings in duty, comprising of a few solar systems, even a few nebulae, which they governed by influencing their magnetic fields. Well, these two paragraphs contain such deep knowledge for us.
Exactly. First of all, this passage starts with sentences that follow and strengthen the meaning of the previous topics. Starting from the first page until this one, I am sure our friends really understood that everything is in our universe is matter. We are in the matter universe. And all these formations, all these gatherings are just a manifestation of matter, and what was the reason for matter's existence? To meet the needs of spirits. The reason for the existence of the matter universe and these formations and gatherings of matter was to respond the different evolutionary needs of spirits. And into this matter universe, into each part of it, from the tiniest to largest parts of it, there is a pouring of a constant flux of influences, and these incoming influences bring out the motion, the activity in the matter universe. And this motion, this activity in the particle or unit of the matter universe brings out the magnetic field of that matter part. As we discussed last week, first an influence arrives in a matter unit, and this is utilized in the center or nucleus of that matter unit. Later, when it is reflected to outside of this unit, this utilized influence brings out a magnetic field, a complex of motions, and as a result, the magnetic field we know in our daily life occurs. And, last week we read that all cosmoses, stars, planets have their own magnetic field synthesis, and also, we humans have a magnetic field synthesis, and here we read that it is called perispirit. As you know very well, in the 1950s, this term has been frequently used with the emergence of neo-spiritualism. There were many studies about it, especially written in Dr. Bedri Ruhselman's books. What is perispirit? What does it? Where is its place? What kind of substances it is made of? There were many articles about this. And here, in the Divine Order and the Universe explains the nature of perispirit clearly, which was not so clear before this book. The book states that this is the magnetic field of human body.
Yes, as you said, in Dr. Ruhselman's book titled Spirit and Universe, this topic was addressed. Yet, back then, because the being, or more correctly, the spirits were not considered as super-universe truths, we were saying I have a spirit, my spirit, etc. And the perispirit was being considered as an intermediary between the spirit and the body. But here we read a good explanation how this intermediary does its functions, how it works. As the magnetic fields of matter, the plan describes this.
Yes, it does. Many of our friends may remember that, in the books Bilyay Foundation published before the Divine Order and the Universe, we have a sequence of layers. A causality body, a mental body, an astral body, and finally, a physical body. We were saying these are the layers of the energy body of humans, but if asked about its mechanism, we couldn't answer it properly because there was not a clear knowledge about this. Now, with this book in our hands, a clear knowledge is given about the perispirit. Spirit, being, consciousness, the consciousness center in the brain and all those magnetic fields interactions between these, which we will read in detail in the further pages.
Here, the most important point is the being, as the representative of the spirit. Previously we read how the motion is initiated in amorphous matter by the original influence coming to the matter universe after filtered through the unitary, and how this initial matter with slight motions becomes a ground for the novice spirits to get experienced among this initial matter, first by passive adaptations. Later, when the original influence, termed as prime influence at this stage, arrives at a gathering of matter parts, and brings out a duality unit with opposite parts in an equilibrium, this emerges as a nucleus and an atom emerges. Then by connecting to an atom, spirits get more experienced in governing this matter. Actually, that spirit learns the ways of receiving and sending increasingly stronger influences to the magnetic field of that matter. As more stronger influences matter receives and reflect outside as stronger magnetic field, matter gets developed more and more. And this process continues in a gradual manner until a spirit gets experienced enough to govern an ensemble of influences and energies, which is a being. And all of this process is under the governance of the original principle. Yes, I made a summary of what we read so far because we need to settle this issue for good. There is no spirit in us. Spirit is not entering a human body or leaving a human body. Between spirit and being, hence, us humans, there is no direct contact. Every interaction between beings and human bodies function through influences arriving at the magnetic fields and influences transmitted from the magnetic fields. So, such questions like how many grams a spirit weigh become meaningless.
Exactly. In his book you mentioned, Mr. Ruhselman, in the 50s, has already discussed and disproved this idea of the perispirit leaves the body during death and it weighs 20 or 21 grams. He had clearly explained in his book why this is not like this by giving examples of research done by an American scientist. And he has already been discussing topics of radioactivity. I was so surprised to read that book. Yes, let's go back to the influences. You made a summary of what we read so far. We just read that, just as complex magnetic field synthesis exists for a world, complex magnetic field syntheses also exist for solar systems and nebulae, which are much more complex than that. Beings do their duty by influencing these realms through the channels of these fields. Soon, we will read how these interaction of influences over magnetic fields of beings work.
What strikes my attention in this passage you just read is that the book states solar systems and nebulae. Plural. Not only our solar system, not our galaxy, but other solar systems, other galaxies, as well. Therefore, I understand that the magnetic field synthesis of bodies in many points in our whole universe are utilized by spirits for advancing their evolution.
And also, as you said, these interaction of influences through magnetic fields works in the same way, not only in our planet or our sun, or not only in our hydrogen cosmos but in all cosmoses and realms which are above and below. When we read the pages about the types of influences, we will understand how this mechanism works much better. And, I'd like to encourage our friends to think about these passages, by asking, what kind of a magnetic field can influence a few solar systems? What kind of a system is this? What kind of a force? Has this been implied or symbolized in our ancient teachings? I make some associations in my mind, but our friends may make more if they think upon such questions.
Of course, in the further pages of the book we will read about the plan of duty, the lower stages of this plan and how the widenings occur in the scope of duty. And we read that as these cadres of duty widen, they encompass worlds or solar systems related to their duties. So, here, we talk about immense organizations, immense power of comprehension, immense governing of systems. And interestingly, we also read that the number of these groups of cadres in duty becomes less and less while their comprehension becomes more and more encompassing. As we read the descriptions about this encompassing governance over worlds, solar systems, galaxies, well, we read these in awe and fascination. Yes, we speak these descriptions, but our minds cannot even grasp it. Time to time we mention that this book refers to the previous topics as it explains these topics in more detail. And here, we refer to its further passages, but for our friends who didn't read the whole book or read with us in this series, let's focus on the pages we read this evening. I continue reading. Matter mentioned so far has not yet entered into the state of being. Here, it must be stated that those who have learned the knowledge given from the start should have understood now that terms like the animate and inanimate in the universe are but words and do not carry a thorough meaning. The order and arrangement of indirect relations of matter with spirits, both in the initial stages and in the hydrogen stage, make it impossible to render discernment such as life and non-life. For, in every matter of universe stages, various relations of spirits to matter in accordance with the character of that stage and evolutionary system always exist. And in the universe, there is no matter that is not dedicated to the evolution of any spirit. That is, there is no matter state which is not temporarily or continuously under service to spirits. This situation is especially obvious for all matter in the hydrogen stage. A matter considered out of this service is unnecessary and purposeless. And in the universe, there is no unnecessary process at all. In this case, it is unwarranted to sink into thoughts such as when matter is connected to spirit it is animate and when it is not it is inanimate. For, every matter has a temporary or continuous connection to a spirit. However, even wishing to call beings animate by seeing that matter is continuously connected to a being is not right either. For, spirits also connect to the previous hydrogen atom in the substage of being until its state of being. Therefore, following the knowledge above, the notion of discerning matter as animate or inanimate is meaningless.
Again, this knowledge is like a manifesto. So, let me go to the fifth page and read. In amorphous matter, A, there is no trace of any motion, it is the absolute and complete motionless state of matter. Since the motion is initiated in the amorphous matter by the original influences coming from outside the universe, by the original principle, the universe becomes a ground of activity and motions. Of course, we cannot imagine this absolute motionless state. And what was the reason for these influences arriving at this motionless matter? The reason was meeting the evolutionary needs of the spirits. And each and every matter in the universe exists to respond to this need of the spirits. All matter exists to meet the needs of the spirits in various levels, in various substances, in various realms, in various degrees. And this evening, if time permits, we will read and discuss the stages after a spirit reaches the state of being, that is, first, a plant body. After reading this passage, saying that before a plant body, matter was inanimate but later it was animate would be wrong. Because we clearly see that matter is animate, because until that state of being, each atom and particle, and even each subatomic particle was hosting the spirits. Spirit, if the simile is apt, traveled an infinitely long journey on and in the structures of atoms, and eventually, reached the state of being. Therefore, before the being emerges, spirit was already utilizing all this matter, and after the state of being, it will continue utilizing all this matter. Yes, its scope will increase. After the state of being, that being will gradually be more able to receive more influences and to reflect these to its spirit. In short, before this state of being, the motion and activity exists, and after the state of being, the motion and activity exist.
Dear Tümerhan, do you agree if I say that this inanimate-animate dilemma started to change in science, especially with the quantum physics? I mean, from that perspective, even a wooden chair is animate. Even in the solid objects, there is an immense activity among the atoms in the quantum level. I think the quantum physics widened our perspective in that sense, especially when we see all these activity in the models and visuals generated about this level. Instead of inanimate or animate, maybe we can say matter not influenced or matter influenced. So, since the first influence arrived at the amorphous matter and initiated motion in it, whatever emerged is animate.
It is exactly as you said. Moreover, there is such a property of activity in the subatomic particles that we cannot comprehend this activity with our current logic and reasoning. Because, we observe that an electron can be in two different places at the same time. And electrons are spinning in orbits around the atom so fast that, we only recently, just 100 years ago became able to detect them. Now we are aware of this, but before these recent discoveries, we were not aware of this high-level activity and this high level of consciousness in the subatomic world which is beyond our wildest imaginations. So, we now say that wherever the motion is, there is an influence arrive at there because what brings out motion is the influence. And previously we had mentioned that the whole universe works by the duality principle, except the unitary. And this duality principle brings out a very important mechanism, namely, the value differentiation. Values change, and in order to restore the equilibrium of these changed values, motion occurs. Therefore, in the matter universe everything, hence, we are always in motion, and if there is motion then saying this thing is animate, that is thing is animate becomes absurd or irrelevant.
And this value is the respond of matter to the incoming influence, and it brings out a value differentiation. The whole complex restores the equilibrium and reflects it from its magnetic field. I understand this in this way. What do you think?
Yes, what we call new value is indeed the new magnetic field of a given unit, starting from the tiniest matter particle to humans, therefore the same is valid for our bodies, as well. For example, we come face to face with an event or incident, and a new value differentiation occurs on our emotions, maybe on our physical body, an influence comes at us and our values become upside down. And what happens next? We work to restore the equilibrium with this new value. An emotional and physical activity occur, and these activity is immediately reflected on our magnetic field.
That's why I like this wordplay done with the word emotion. E is energy and emotion is the energy in motion. So meaningful in that sense. Then, our emotions bring out value differentiation by our response or reactions to the events in life. How we direct our emotions, how we orient them. When we learn how to master our emotions in order to elevate their frequencies, I go in the direction of more positive values. With anger, grudge, negativity, selfishness, etc., those values decrease, yet with compassion, love, altruism, those values increase towards the positive. Yes, for many people, it was a disappointment when they read in this book that even the most sublime feeling we have is only matter, but actually, it opens us doors to work on our emotions and feelings like objects of self-study.
This topic reminded me of what they taught us in about living organisms during our early education's curriculum. One of the first signs in describing a living organism is that, if it reacts to stimuli, then it is alive. Interestingly, we observe the same in the subatomic world, as well. When the energy of an atom is increased, it immediately reacts and throws an electron out. Or the second sign, a living organism has the ability to reproduce. Yes, in biological level, a sperm and an ovum are needed for this. And again, the same thing happens in the atoms or molecules, as well. For example, one carbon atom and one oxygen atom bond and carbon monoxide atom emerge. Again, as a third sign, it is said that a living organism must grow and get developed. Well, from the first page of this book we read so far that how matter received influences and get developed, we can even say, grow out of a dark, amorphous state to become first a subatomic particle, then an atom, so on. As a fourth sign, a living organism has homeostasis, that is, internal stability while adjusting to changing external conditions. Try to disturb the internal stability of an atom, if you can, without using extreme heat. We cannot. Another sign of a living organism is metabolic activity, that is, a burning must happen. We breathe in oxygen or eat foods, their digestion, all of these possible by chemical reactions which literally happen all the time in the molecular level. And we may notice another thing. We had mentioned that spirit was only receiving impressions until reaching the state of being, and during its long journey at the level of atom and molecule, that is, without influencing the structure of the atom, spirit accumulates the observations about how all of these to be done as the evolutionary values. And when spirit builds a being, then it puts all these observations into application, and the aliveness as we know it begins. Yes, we can change our perspective by thinking on such similarities in the signs of animation.
Animate as we know it. After reading this book, we know that animation actually begins with the arrival of the initial influence at the amorphous matter. Yes, we need to widen our perspective about what is animation. And from that perspective, life is where the motion is. After all, matter without motion don't enter our field of comprehension, we can't imagine or detect it. Alright, I continue reading. Spirits, rendering applications in the initial hydrogen states which have not yet entered the state of being, prepare passively and mechanically in this matter. This matter is not under the governance of spirits that will render applications. They are only each constituted as grounds, allowing the adjustment of initial student spirits in the universe, with influences coming from the unitary in accordance with the necessities of sublime principles. So far, necessary knowledge has been given about the development of matter and about spirits obeying these developments by a mechanical form of progress. Now, we may start giving knowledge about the transitions of this matter into separate beings, about the transitions of spirits to the automatic or semi-comprehending evolutionary stages in our cosmos. constituted matter that has been turned into an initial hydrogen atom had been grasped by a spirit. That spirit is connected to that atom. However, as we have mentioned, it is not in the situation of governing it. Spirit cannot step out of the ordered and organized motions of matter that emerged with the original principle, it tries to adapt to them. In this spirit, there is yet no intuition, even no mechanical instincts at all. All the while, as the hydrogen atom does motions and developments in the direction determined by original influences, and oriented to the evolutionary purpose of the spirit which is connected to it, it services the evolution of spirit. As the result of this development, the hydrogen atom turns into hydrogen H as known by mankind. And successively, the elements known by chemistry emerge. This state is elevated to higher states and the motions of atoms become complicated. Regarding its values, its structure enriches. In its structure various groupings, gatherings, and systems occur. Its magnetic field synthesis enters into more complex, more complicated states. In this way, the hydrogen atom, by passing through many stages, transforms into the states of oxygen, phosphorus, copper, silver, barium, platinum, gold, radium, uranium, centurium. As the hydrogen atom develops in this way, the spirit which is connected to it and adapting to its motions also develops very slowly with a mechanical automatic tempo. As this evolution of the spirit accrues, preparations for some of its instinctual behaviors pertaining to various motion combinations, in other words, pertaining to relations within matter, are done as well. Eventually, the hydrogen atom starts to exuberate from the cadre of the highest elements known to mankind. And it enriches its structure with larger combinations, which have started to transmit high energies that mankind cannot detect or posit. Meanwhile, preparations of the spirit, which is both causing this development and whose evolutionary progress is in parallel to it, for its initial behavioral instincts pertaining to relations between matter combinations, advance. All of these always occur within the great harmony of original influences, which always target the evolution of spirits. That is, as we previously said, original influences that gather the atom from the primitive matter of the amorphous milieu by descending in the midst of matter, reflect the evolutionary necessities of spirits to the atom in the developing state. It provides for preparations of reaching of the spirit, in parallel with matter, to a higher stage. In this developmental stage of the hydrogen atom, there are no secondary influences arriving at the structure of the atom. Here, only original influences descend to it. The original influences are influences filtrated from the unitary and pertaining to matter and spirits. This situation continues up to the stages of being. This is a long passage, so if you agree, we pause here and discuss what we read.
At this point, it may be a good idea to play a clip about the origins of elements. Because, we just read in the passage about these, oxygen, copper, silver, barium, platinum, gold, radium, uranium, centurium. This clip may give us more insights.
Satellite Chandra observed the last moments of a giant star. Cassiopeia constellation is famous with its V shape. And this is Cassiopeia A. This is what remains after the explosion of a giant star. These stars die by exploding. By the help of X-rays, it is discovered that these dying stars blow combustible gases to immensely wide areas. The heat of these matter, near to 50 million degrees Celsius, tell us about extraordinary tales of combustions.
We saw clearly how these happened. It was a very exciting moment. We really understood what Chandra's data meant. In this image, we see an immense accumulation of various elements. This green knot looks like made up of silicon. These red knots are made up of iron. And this is such a new thing. So far, we couldn't observe this. So we can say that this is clearly a new matter created by the supernova.
Silicon, iron, calcium, Aggregates, as large as the whole of our solar system, floats in the midst of a dead star's remains. Heavy elements which cannot be occur within the red giant were produced in great numbers, and the mechanism allowing their birth is discovered recently. Nearly 1 million years ago, the ancestor of the Cassiopeia A reached the end of its life. The heat in the center of the star suddenly rose. The following nuclear fission didn't result in oxygen, which normally does in any red giants. When the heat exceeded 700 million degrees Celsius, neon and magnesium emerged. At the 3 billion degrees Celsius, silicon, sulfur, argon and calcium emerged. At the 5 billion degrees Celsius, iron appeared. So, a star which only contained hydrogen and helium at first, with this incredibly high degrees of heat, can produce elements with atomic mass equal to iron or less. And then an explosion which is beyond our comprehension happens. And by the released energy, more than 60 new elements emerge. These elements have atomic mass larger than iron. These new elements will make up dust and gases which will travel in space thousands of kilometers per second. Now, all elements that exist in nature emerge.
I found it interesting that all elements like the oxygen we breathe, the silicon we use in computer chips, and like iron we use in the world today, are created in these stars before they are dispersed into the interstellar matter. These matters, from their creation to their involvement in life and eventually to their roles in our planet, have gone through such a process. It always surprises me. Explosions of stars allowed the emergence of all elements that make up our world.
Maybe, I can suggest our friends to search, for example, Origins of Elements, in YouTube, and you can watch the documentaries and lectures they like. Such informative videos may give insights to us, which in turn, may help us to understand what we read in this book so far. Here, a word strikes my attention. That spirit is connected to that atom. This word means that at that time, the surface for spirit in the universe is that atom. That is, all motions and activity rendered in the structure of an atom make up the location or site of the spirit. Later we will read in the book how these locations or sites emerge. As you may notice, so far, the book mentioned 2 influences coming from the original principle. One of these is the prime influences and the other is the evolutionary values. Later, in the book we will read that within the prime influences there are also some super-universe truths, and upon entering into our universe, these truths become mechanism of destiny and mechanism of time. So, a spirit's connecting to an atom and its following development, how this process of development continues first in the stars, later in bigger stars and finally in the supernovas, and it exceeds the limits or boundaries of the hydrogen cosmos as we know it. And, at this point, we can watch the second clip.
Gamma rays are produced by the hottest and most energetic objects in the universe, such as neutron stars and pulsars, supernova explosions, and regions around black holes. They continue traveling far distances of the universe, and sometimes their travel ends at the atmosphere of Earth when they are absorbed. Before the balloons reaching great heights and the rockets carrying gamma-ray sensors to the upper parts of the atmosphere, scientists didn't have any chance to detect and study gamma rays. These rays are lethal for humans. On the world, radioactive decay, nuclear explosions, and even by the lightings can produce gamma rays. The sun, with coronal flares, emit gamma rays together with charged particles. Scientists tracking these gamma rays study those charged particles because they can create problems in the energy lines and communication network. Gamma rays are the strongest of the electromagnetic radiation rays, can kill the living cells. Because of this, medical doctors use gamma rays to kill the cancer cells. Gamma rays have the shortest wavelength among the electromagnetic waves, just as long as an atom nucleus. Their wavelength is so short that they roam among the atoms as if they are planets in the solar system. And this makes it harder to detect them. Gamma ray detectors generally contain tightly packed crystal blocks. As the rays go through, they collide with the electrons of the crystals, and the detectors can only detect the charged particles produced in the collision. Chemical elements in the soil and the rocks, when exposed to cosmic rays, emit gamma rays particular to them in detectable amounts. Scientists used these gamma rays to understand the elements that make up the surface of Mars. The gamma spectrometer in the NASA's Odyssey satellite detects these and produces maps, like this map of hydrogen concentration on Mars. Source of gamma rays are stars, supernovas, black holes, and pulsars. NASA's Fermi telescope produced a 360-degree map of the Milky Way and displayed these sources. Gamma ray bursts with high energy can happen every day. They flash and then vanish. Here you see gamma ray bursts at every 89 seconds of the pulsar Vela's rotation. These bursts are immensely high energy and luminous. Such bursts release more energy than our sun can release during its expected 10 billion year lifetime, just in 10 seconds. NASA's SWIFT satellite recorded the gamma ray burst of a star, which is 13 billion light-years away. This had happened in the young age of our universe, when it was just 630 million years old. The more recent gamma-ray burst produced the highest energy level in records. It was equal to the energy of 9,000 typical supernova explosions. As we continue studying gamma rays, we will have more discoveries in astronomy. We will discover new methods of treatments in medicine, and we will protect our communication and energy networks better.
Yes, I hope that these clips will help our friends to gain more insights into the topics we discussed this evening.
All right, I continue reading. Starting from its initial constitution, the hydrogen atom finally reaches such a stage that it starts to transmit energies that are superworld matter unknown to mankind, in states of very subtle and complicated matter combinations. When the atom reaches the developmental stage of its ability to transmit these high and complex energies, the spirit causing it to reach that level in the face of the original principle also reaches a stage of evolution, after a long cycle of application, at which it can have instinctual behaviors of relations and motions between matter. Thus, the high hydrogen atom at the uppermost boundaries of world matter starts to transmit such strong and complex energies that these can no longer belong to world matter. Nevertheless, these energies are also not in a gathered state but are disarrayed. However, there are immense differences between this desultory state and the desultory state of amorphous matter in the primitive milieu which we previously mentioned. The former were the formless, simple, crude matter with primitive motions which were almost inert. These is, however, powerful and valued matter in states of surpassing value that is constituted by rich matter combinations, with very complex motions and complicated structures. We call the milieu in which they exist semi-subtle milieu. This semi-subtle milieu is a kind of nebulae constituted by high energies that form the echelon of a completely new and much higher realm than both the amorphous milieu below the hydrogen atom and the astronomic nebulae constituted by initial hydrogen atoms, and the constitution of such a semi-subtle milieu that exists higher than the world expresses the slow shifting of the world, in other words, of the hydrogen cosmos up to a higher cosmos. So, these high and disarrayed energies constitute the most primitive and simplest atoms of this semi-subtle cosmos, that is, of the nebulae of superhydrogen cosmos. Thus, higher and disarrayed energies which have started to emanate from the initial atoms of this semi-subtle milieu, through their development, have now reached the ability and possibilities of gathering and entering into a state of being which can serve a spirit until the end of the universe. Similarly, spirits that have evolved with them up to that stage, always with the help of the original influences, have also reached the capability of gathering these high but disarrayed energies and make a being out of them. When this state occurs, original influences, which also consist of the influences of a spirit that has reached the merit of building a body for itself out of these disarrayed energies, descend in the midst of these disarrayed and high energies. There, by gathering these energies around a perceptual point which we have previously explained, they make a gathering out of them. In the original influences there are also influences belonging to spirits evolved up to that stage. These influences are reflected and connected to the being, that is, to the energy ensemble by the original influence. In this way, that energy ensemble which we call being, has been put in service to be a reflector to all behaviors of that spirit and to send all responses of those behaviors back to it until the end of the universe, and has entered into a state of becoming a symbol, a vehicle of the spirit in universe. Let's pause at this point and discuss what we read. There are many important sentences here.
First of all, we can say that these extremely strong and complex energies are not in a gathered state, they are in a disarrayed state. But the book states that there are immense differences between this and the previously mentioned disarrayed state of the amorphous matter. Why? Because the complexity of motions in their structures are immensely higher. Former state was almost inert. Please notice that the book doesn't state that it is inert. It was almost inert. Because, as we mentioned, we cannot comprehend matter totally inert. Here, another word the book uses, kind of nebulae. So, as we watched in the clips, this disarrayed state of extremely strong and complex energies occur by the mechanism we saw in the clips. Another point, these strong and complex energies do not remain as they are but they exceed the boundaries of our hydrogen cosmos, hence, our comprehension, perception and of the limits of our current measurements and continue to be developed to make up an echelon, a semi-subtle realm. These may like be the gamma rays we saw in the second clip. And here, we read this, a spirit that has reached the merit of building a body for itself out of these disarrayed energies. Here, again, the book describes the being as a body. The book states this in many places, for example, it mentions exchange or interaction of influences between bodies, and actually, the book means the beings in that passage. And we read that the original influences descend into the midst of these disarrayed high energies, and these original influences also consist of the spirit that reached the merit of building a body for itself, that is, a being. These influences gather these high energies around a perceptual point. And this concept of perceptual point is very important. Later we will read in the book about this perceptual point when the book gives more detail about the being. Because, the book will state there that the ferment of the being is comprehension, perception. That is, what makes up the being is comprehension. And later, we will read, comprehension is a power interconnecting the endless matter systems in the matter universe. This sentence conveys us so many meanings. Now, the comprehension of the spirit that reached the merit of building a being for itself is only in a level to gather these disarrayed energies and make an ensemble of them. But please know that this perceptual point is not a stable point located in our hydrogen realm, so please do not understand this perceptual point has a location.
Yes, the concept of comprehension or perception begins to be emphasized more and more. And we read in the book that all those experiences and knowledge we acquired during those 500 to 700 lifetimes or incarnations in the further stages will become the essential knowledge of the being after comparative accounting done at the end of each incarnation will be added or gathered at this perceptual point, and the being develops or widens its comprehension in this way.
Yes, and we must notice that, in this stage we just read, a spirit's power of gathering these energies in this perceptual point, we talk about a simple comprehension. That is, it is still the simplest knowledge of spirit about the universe. And we already read that the being is the reflection of the spirit in our universe. So, in this stage, it is only in a state to gather these energies. However, after this, an environ for the being emerge which will get developed much faster relative to beforehand. What happens next? The being begins to build bodies from the matter in the hydrogen realm. But it cannot build complex bodies right away.
It starts from the simplest forms of single cells.
Yes, from single cells. And gradually building more and more complex bodies, spirit works to widen this perceptual point of gathering. And this widening means the development of being, the evolution of spirit.
And also here, we read that spirit reaches a stage of evolution, after a long cycle of application, at which it can have instinctual behaviors of relations and motions between matter. So, it is still in the preparatory stage to getting prepared for instincts. These don't begin yet in this stage. These are very important phrases. Also, the book introduces more details about the concept of the semi-subtle realm. I read, a completely new and much higher realm, the constitution of such a semi-subtle milieu that exists higher than the world expresses the slow shifting of the world, in other words, of the hydrogen cosmos up to a higher cosmos. So, this part is also very important. Time flew again. If you agree, we stop here for this evening. There are some questions from our friends, let me read. If we take Mars as a being, does it mean that Mars has a spirit? Or our planet has a spirit? I think our friend asks if a spirit governs Mars?
I think it is better to say that all those gatherings of planets, stars and galaxies is a gradual process, and all the governance of such immense gatherings are administrated by the plans in duty that are related to meeting the needs of the beings incarnated there.
We already mentioned the further stages in the evolution of the spirit and the development of its being, that is, from plant cells to plants, then an intermediary plan where the being does the preparations of building a body for the next stage, from there to animal cells, then another intermediary plan for preparing to the next stage, and again another intermediary plan because it cannot jump to the human stage right away, because before this stage, the scope of preparation gets wider, which entails applications in the solar or extraterrestrial systems, and then the being will build brain cells, and only after this stage, governing a whole human body will become possible. We will read all these stages in detail with you in this series. So, as you can see, this is not an easy process. And governing a planet is not a single being's duty. As the beings become included in the groups and then in larger groups in the plan of duty, where individuality of the beings diminish because of the integration of comprehensions, governing such complex bodies as planets, solar systems, etc. is done by the organizations or cadres of duty. And we must remember that all of these occur within cycles which are almost eternity.
As a reply to our friend, I'd like to remind that if you could follow what we read and discuss this evening, or better, if you read the book or watched the previous videos in this series, it must be clear that at this stage the spirit builds a being from the semi-subtle energies, but this being does not have a chance to control these semi-subtle energies. First, it is meant to learn, study the matter of the hydrogen universe, at first as an observer. Then, after learning these things, it is meant to control these and exchange influences through these matters. And when it reaches the human stage and when it completes the human stage, only then, the being has a chance to learn how to change or form a structure or a realm which is woven by the same semi-subtle energies the being was formed from. And that realm is called Plan of Love, in this book. And when the being learns utilizing the matter of the plan of love, that is, the semi-subtle matter of this semi-subtle realm, only then, the being begins to shoulder some duties from the simple levels of the plan of duty. And of course, when compared with these simple duties, the stages for the beings to complete until governing a planet, a star, a solar system is another eternity in our time comprehension.
Yes, we hope that our answers are helpful. A friend made a comment, I think there is a God responsible of a planet. Well, it may be better to think as a system, an organization responsible. For example, in symbolism the Greek pantheon expresses a system. And the word God here is not what we mean when we say the unattainability of unattainability, which this book states as the original principle, and we read in the book the word Allah only once.
Yes, it is much better if we say ruling mechanism or ruling organization.
Yes, exactly, Let's say there is a spiritual ruling organization for each planet or solar system or a star. I think our friend wishes to assign a divinity to such organizations. Throughout human history, there were many names used, but all of these are symbolic expressions of such a high-level organizational system. I think, now it is better for us to overcome the confusion of such names and say an organizational system and its cadre of duty. All right, thank you for your contributions, dear friends. The topics we discussed together are hard to understand easily. Because of this, we truly appreciate your work and efforts for making this series more interactive.
As Tülin said, even joining in and staying with us until the end of each video requires hard work, and dear friends, together we are doing our best to make this book more understandable. Thank you for your efforts and persistence.
Good evening.
Good evening.